broken. Broken like so many of the socialist promises which duped the British people into returning them to office in 1945. Do you remember these promises? The picture you are about to see will help to remind you. It is an actual record of the pledges which were made by the socialists at the general election in 1945, or have been made even later by responsible members of the Labour Party. The posters and leaflets which you will see were actually distributed by the Labour Party. The extracts from socialist publications are all genuine and unaltered passages, and verbal promises have been most carefully checked. I do not wish to underestimate the difficulties which the socialist government has had to face, but these difficulties were known, or should have been known, when the promises were made. Many new difficulties now face the government, but these are the result of their own incompetence. It is for you to decide whether the Labour Party deceived the public at the last general election. And it is for you to determine whether the party which climbed to power by making false promises is fit to receive further support. This film may serve to remind you why so many were tempted to vote Labour in 1945, and why now many of them, disillusioned, are determined to return the Conservatives, the Unionists, to power at the first available opportunity.
First, let us recall the tragic but splendid period of the war, when the country was united under the inspiring leadership of Mr. Churchill. Do you remember the frenzy of work, the blackout, the raids and all the other discomforts of war, and its comradeship too? Yes, we were all in it then, a united nation, all of us working and fighting with an object in view. U-boats did their worst, but Lord Woolton ensured the nation's food supply. How can we forget this? Or this? And our enemies. He was a National Socialist. And another socialist, or at least they both started that way. Then came the first stage of victory. Germany was defeated, and hardly had the celebrations and the rejoicing died down than Britain was at the polls in the first general election for 10 years. Churchill had united the nation during the war by promising nothing but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. How different was the appeal of the Labour Party during the election?
First Labour.
What did we want in 1945? What do we still want today? Well, take houses. Not easy to find in those days, and even harder today. The socialists were well aware of the value of housing as an election point. In their manifesto appeared these words:
Housing will be one of the greatest and one of the earliest tests of a government's real determination to put the nation first. Labour's pledge is firm and direct. It will proceed with a housing program with the maximum practical speed until every family in this island has a good standard of accommodation. There should be a Ministry of Housing and Planning.
What are you so enthusiastic about, sir?
Who, me?
Yes, you.
What do you mean?
Well, it's a lot of nonsense.
But it says in the book here.
Never mind what the book says. It's what Mr. Greenwood said for the government later that matters. Listen. In the meantime, the Ministry of Housing and Planning is in cold storage. So said Mr. Greenwood. As far as I know, it's still there. Yes, and a lot of other people should have done the same thing. But they were again misled by Sir Stafford Cripps. On June the 23rd, the Western Daily Press reported him as saying,
"If the Labour Party is returned to power, the housing situation would be clarified in a fortnight."
Go on, that's not all.
As for housing, I think that could be dealt with within a fortnight.
And Mr. Strachey added his little bit at Dundee.
The Labour government is the only one which will get you a house.
And what's the result? Have you got a house, sir?
No, I ain't. Living with me in-laws, I am. And anyway, mind your own ruddy business.
You see that? And there are millions more like him. And why are houses so long being built? Perhaps Mr. Morrison unwittingly supplied the answer at East Lewisham in June 1945. Listen.
We shall not get houses merely by passing Acts of Parliament or by local authorities passing resolutions. We shall get them by action, organisation, and the mobilisation of the building industry, including materials, in the national interest.
But that was only part of the answer. Straight Left, an election broadsheet, supplied the rest.
It is a gigantic task. It cannot be left to private enterprise.
Strange, because I can remember that the Churchill government's promise of 220,000 permanent houses in the 2 years following the European War was sarcastically described by Mr. Greenwood as chicken feed for a hungry nation. Yet the Socialist government built only 124,000 in a similar period of office, 96,000 short of Mr. Greenwood's chicken feed. And it's all the more surprising compared with the 340,000 a year average rate of building by private enterprise between 1933 and 1939.
Yes, housing, or the lack of it, is an unhappy subject for discussion, so let's turn to something else. How about food? Here again, Let Us Face the Future was most informative.
The nation wants food, work, and homes. It wants more than that. It wants good food in plenty.
And so was another MP.
Houses with empty larders are a mockery. Everyone must be able to buy ample food.
Mr. Alfred Barnes, who was soon to take office as Minister of Transport, took this argument further. He even advised sections of the electorate how to vote.
Housewives should vote against a further lowering of the standard of life through reduced rations.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. Food and the amount of it is a very important question to the British people. Let us therefore see what socialism did to our rations within just over 2 years of power. Let us too have suitable music to accompany the death of our living standards.
And these, perhaps the most unkindest cuts of all, as Mark Antony might have said.
Not only have our rations been reduced, but many of the substitutes we came to know in wartime are disappearing from our shelves. And clothes, too. What woman likes to dwell on the scarcity of her wardrobe today? And yet, in 1945, Mr. Dalton was full of promise.
We can count on increased supplies for the civilian population, not necessarily in the next month or two, but during the next rationing period.
He had only just left the Board of Trade, so he certainly didn't speak in ignorance of the situation. Summing up, Straight Left said,
Socialism, in short, is just another word for wise national housekeeping, the only sure road to economic efficiency, socialist well-being and real freedom for all.
Now that's interesting. Notice the use of the word freedom. It was a line of approach well to the fore in the Socialist election speeches of 1945. Sir Stafford Cripps was a great disciple, and at Plymouth, on June the 29th, he said,
"The Labour Party does not propose to infringe on liberties for which we have been fighting for the last 50 years.
And yet what does this promise mean today? We have 13,000 paid snoopers, the size of a medium football crowd, legally empowered to enter your house, your shop, or any part of your property. The Englishman's home is no longer his castle.
I want to make an inspection of your premises. Here is my authority for doing so.
You're not allowed to off as you like. The basic was stopped. Cigarettes became rarer and rarer. And a bottle of something to drown your sorrows is well beyond the reach of the ordinary man. But what is far more important, you're not allowed to work as and where you please. And this doesn't just apply to the necessary and unlovely jobs. It applies to everybody.
Name, please.
Harry Smith.
Occupation.
Minor.
Age.
31.
Married or single?
Married.
Nationality?
British.
What do you want?
Well, I want to change my job and go and work...
Impossible.
But it's a better job, man. I got 4 kids.
It's out of the question. Good day.
Yet Sir Stafford said,
I do not believe that it will be necessary to direct Labour in times of peace.
And Mr. Whiteley, who became Labour's chief whip, was more definite.
The Labour Party will, of course, abolish all restrictions on personal liberty at the earliest moment.
Wonderful. But as Dr. Joad would say, it all depends what you mean by the earliest moment. Anyway, Harry Smith won't believe socialist election promises in future.
The British people, controlled, restricted and shackled by bureaucracy, have almost as few privileges as a convict. During the war, controls and restrictions were accepted as necessities. Today, we would endure the same annoyances gladly if we could be convinced that it was in the country's interests. But what are the country's interests? The government don't seem to know. Why, Aneurin Bevan, writing in a little book called Why Not Trust the Tories, said,
By some twist of the Tory mind, it is good trade to persuade someone in a remote part of the world to buy our goods, but ruinous to allow the same goods to be consumed by our own people. Expanding exports are the will-o'-the-wisp private enterprise is compelled to pursue by underpaying its own workers and thus limiting its own market.
So said Aneurin Bevan. I wonder whether Sir Stafford knows. After all, he's repeatedly asking us to work harder in order to export more. But while these two struggle over a Tory doctrine, let Emanuel Shinwell be heard, as he was heard in the House of Commons in 1944.
There never was a greater fallacy uttered in this or any other assembly. You might imagine from what honourable members say, and the white paper on employment says, that if you fail to increase exports, this country's standard of living will diminish.
Well, well, these 3 united ministers will want to argue it out. So let's look at a few more promises that were never fulfilled. How about coal? What was it Mr. Griffith said in 1945?
If Labour's policy for coal is not applied without delay, there will be empty grates and shivering homes in our island this winter, and, yes, next winter too.
Remember the winter of 1946-47? The power cuts, the candles, the empty grates and the shivering homes of our island. Yet Labour's so-called policy was put into action immediately. Let's hear Sir Stafford again.
Nationalisation after the war will ensure that goods are available at decent prices to everybody.
And Ernest Bevan.
Output would be improved, and the men given a reasonable chance of good wages, and the price of coal to the consumer would be lower.
Dear me. Perhaps Mr. Bevan stands on his head to read the figures.
Going up? These are easily the oddest price cuts I've ever seen, Mr. Bevan. Yet there is better news of coal. The target of 200 million tons was reached in 1947. But why on earth a target of 200 million tons? Why, in 1937, private enterprise produced 241 million tons. In a normal year, with no crisis to spur production, and without the aid of the machinery developed since then and pressed into use today. Anyway, a lot of the 1947 output was poor quality stuff. About 10,400,000 tons of it was open cast coal with low burning properties. Yes, in this and in countless other things, the Labour Party has cast away its election promises. Nor did they all apply to Great Britain. Without going into the rights and wrongs of the Palestine question, let's listen to Mr. Dalton's words at the Blackpool Conference in 1945. And watch at the same time these illegal immigrants being sent away from Palestine. Mr. Dalton said,
"It is morally wrong and politically indefensible to restrict entry to Palestine of Jews desiring to go there."
And in foreign policy, Ebbw Vale was the place where Aneurin Bevan said,
"Because of its socialist policy, the Labour Party is the best fitted to cooperate more and more closely with Russia."
Both Mr. Molotov and Mr. Wyszynski have already said quite enough on this subject. What a mess this country is in today. Tired, mentally defeated by petty restrictions which have destroyed the will to work. No wonder we have drifted into crisis and disaster.
No, I'm sorry, madam.
It's for export only.
No cigarettes. No matches.
Not today.
I'm afraid not. No egg.
No.
No. No.
No.
No. No. No. No. No. No. No.
No.
No.
No.
Today it does us good to look back and see what we voted for in 1945. The empty promises, the unattainable utopia. We begin to realize that blood, toil, tears, and sweat, with an ultimate promise of victory, would have been preferable to promises of victory first and a double share of misery afterwards. The people of Britain have been duped by glib promises and empty phrases, the catchpennies of electioneering, the easy sales talk of a street corner watch seller.
I promise you there's a watch in every packet. What about you, sir?
The ruins of our hopes are about us, smashed by the stupid inefficiency of our present leaders. The way to sanity and prosperity lies ahead. It is the right-hand road. The left, paved with broken pledges, leads to final and utter disaster.